There is Messianism, which is exclusivity and annihilation of the others, and striving for that type of Messianism is a path of evil and of death. But the Jewish Messianism is a vision for all of humanity. Hi, I'm Yakov Nagen. I'm an Israeli rabbi devoted to interreligious fraternity. And this is 18 Questions, 40 Israeli Thinkers from 1840.
From 1840, this is 18 Questions, 40 Israeli Thinkers, and I'm your host, Sterling Fruchter. 18 Questions, 40 Israeli Thinkers is a new podcast that interviews Israel's leading voices to explore those critical questions people are having today on Zionism, the Israel-Hamas war, democracy, morality, Judaism, peace, Israel's future, and so much more. Every week, we introduce you to fresh perspectives and challenging ideas about Israel from across the political spectrum that you won't find anywhere else. So if you're the kind of person who wants to learn, understand, and dive deeper into Israel, then join us on our journey as we pose 18 pressing questions to the 40 Israeli journalists, scholars, and religious thinkers you need to hear from today. If religion is part of the problem, then it must be part of the solution. That's a quote famously attributed to Rabbi Menachem Froman, a fascinating religious Zionist Dati Leumi rabbi who passed away a little over a decade ago, who dedicated his life and was so heavily involved in peace work in Israel from that religious angle, transcending political divides, transcending religious divides, specifically trying to bridge the gaps between Jews and Muslims, Israelis and Palestinians. If you want an excellent introduction into his work, into all the unique parts of it, the controversial parts of it, go on our 1840 website. Yehuda Fogel, our in-house editor, has a phenomenal primer on Rav Froman. It's missing a picture because we had some copyright issues, so don't be deterred from that. But I highly recommend it. And the reason why I'm bringing Rav Froman up for this interview specifically is because our guest today is Rav Yakov Nagen, a student and friend of Rav Froman, who to many is carrying on the torch of his legacy and the work that he does. Rav Nagen is a religious Zionist rabbi who is a leader in Israel in interfaith work between Israelis, Arabs, Palestinians, Christians, Jews, Muslims, everyone who's here. But specifically, Judaism, Islam, and Eastern religions is where he primarily focuses. And as he'll talk about in the interview, he's particularly interested in Jewish-Muslim relations. Rav Nagen is director of the Or Torah Stone Interfaith Center, which encompasses a lot, including the Beit Midrash for Judaism and Humanity, the Blickle Center for Interfaith Dialogue, which I totally mispronounced when I was interviewing him, which when we were speaking afterward and he corrected me. So it's not Blickle Center, it's the Blickle Center if anyone ever has to reference it again. So just keep that in mind. And Rav Nagen wrote a phenomenal book called U-Shmo Echad. It's in Hebrew, and it has several different authors. It's not actually just him. I think he was an editor of it, or it was from one of those centers from Or Torah Stone, which has a lot of essays exploring the philosophical and biblical dimensions of what type of vision we're all working towards, of a universalist, not just a Jewish future, but a universalist future, of how Judaism is meant to bring about a Messianic universalism that applies to all nations and all people. And so to preface this interview, if anyone is trying to put Rav Nagen in a box, they're going to fail to understand him. He is a Messianic religious Zionist who doesn't quite fit into right or left categories. As he elaborates, his vision for Zionism, for Judaism, is very loving, very universalist in its implications, and at the same time, he is still a strong defender of Israel as a Jewish state. There's a lot to unpack there of what that means practically, what that looks like, and what that means in the context of today. But needless to say, Rav Nagen is a figure of hope for today. One of the things that he said that really struck me in the course of our interview, and he was really trying to drill this point home, is that in his view, and this is work he's very deeply involved with, the 21st century is a major breakthrough of Jewish-Muslim fraternity with the Abraham Accords, with so many other things that are going on in the world. And he still is not losing hope on the potential for that, and the potential for us to bring in this Messianic future that is peaceful, that's loving. So if you're looking for hope of someone who's deeply involved in this work, in interfaith work, in Israel, at a time when it's so desperately needed to reassure us about our future, then Rav Nagen is your person. I have been a huge fan of his for so long. His writings are incredible. He has, I believe, 4 books, hundreds of articles on spirituality, on peace, on so much more. You can really just Google him and you'll find a treasure trove. But enough of my rambling. I'm very happy and very excited to introduce you to Rav Nagen. So here is 18 Questions with Rabbi Yakov Nagen. As an Israeli and as a Jew, How are you feeling at this moment in Israeli history?
I think for Israelis and Jews throughout the world, October 7th and its aftermath is transformational. True on whether our personal lives and our feelings is part of the Jewish people and part of humanity. Certainly as a Israeli Jew, it's very personal. The pain and trauma are very close. It's students, friends, neighbors who are among the dead and injured. And everything we think about, we have to rethink. In many ways, I felt that in the great story of the Jewish people, we have gone to if in the past I would talk about the Jewish people on survival mode, we have now the luxury to go into vision mode, building the great vision of the future of the Jewish people. And October 7th returned us, and certainly me, to realize how fragile the world we live in. And yes, we won't give up on dreaming about the vision of the future, but the survival mode, which was so much a part of the story of the Jewish people throughout the ages, it's back again.
What has been Israel's greatest success and greatest mistake in its current war against Hamas?
Success and failure, I would probably relate to the different stratas of society. If you want to see part of the positive, I think it's going to the people. We went from so fragmented in the judicial debate before that, feeling that society is falling apart in a dualism of us against the them, and the us and the them being other parts of Israeli and Jewish society. The greatest success is what the times and places we went beyond that. And in fact, even on a personal note, on every day in prayer, the blessing of Modim, of thanking God, is part of the daily prayer. And the words are fixed, but I always try to add some personal words of my own, of something from today to thank God for. And I was deeply challenged in the aftermath of October 7th, because the trauma and the pain was so overwhelming. The little things that I would give thanks for each day seemed trivial in comparison. But at some point I felt, yes, with all the trauma, to express gratitude to God that I am a part of my people, that I am part of the Jewish people. And that also brought me the insight of how much we are family. If just like family could bicker with one another as only family could, and I think this characterized Israeli society before October 7th. After October 7th, like family, we've come together, whether Jews in Israel, Jews in the world. And I think sometimes some of the media portrayals of different demonstrations or the like have not correctly characterized the deep solidarity and unity and empathy for one another, which still today characterizes the people of Israel and the Jewish people through the world. The failing I would see as relating to the leadership. I feel we deserve a better leadership, and that bickering and which characterize society as a whole, somehow the reality of the Jewish people in Israel, abroad, that solidarity, that going beyond personal interests, self-sacrifice, unfortunately, I don't feel this characterizes our leadership. I think they once said about the British Army that it's a army of lions led by mules. And I think some paraphrase that could be applied to Israeli society today.
How have your religious views changed since October 7th?
I've been reading a lot of the Bible since the October 7th, in particular, the later prophets. And part of it, I feel October 7th is a global event, meaning realizing it's not just about us. It's not about this tiny country called Israel, so much smaller than so many other larger countries that almost no one can place on the map, and a struggle with the people in Gaza. Realizing there's a global event taking place. It's not just about us, and the forces on all sides are much greater than the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And for me, that brings me back to the visions of the prophets that for many reasons have been guiding me for years, as I'll elaborate later, that the prophets talk about a future that deals with global realities. And I think about close to 3,000 years ago, or 2,500 years ago, whatever your timing or on biblical scholarship is, how on earth are they talking about the global society, from the far east to the far west, from the corners of the earth? I mean, you grow up in the little village you grew up in, you take your camel a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right. But the pathos of the prophets is envisioning a future. Part of it is the return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. Beyond hope, beyond belief has happened. And part of it is a future of global events, some positive, but some negative, of conflict and connection. And for me, in the deepening of the simple religious faith, that there's some great story that we're part of that's unfolding, I feel that emphasized in the current realities. And I go back to these ancient books, and even if I can't understand why things are so traumatic and painful, it does give a feeling that this is a great story which is unfolding that was foreseen. So that's one aspect maybe of personal religious belief, but certainly something which I'm sure we'll talk about later. This has impacted a lot on my interfaith work. And if Dickens at the beginning of A Tale of Two Cities says, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, I think the interfaith, certainly Jewish Muslim interfaith, we could say it is certainly the worst of times, people understand, but the best of times, or perhaps meaning it's more important than ever, that's the position that I try to defend and have been working on.
What do you look for in deciding which Knesset party to vote for?
Wow. So certainly I'd rather not talk about a particular party, but really hoping of the vision of what I would like the Knesset to be about, and I hope a party would emerge. There's a tragic book by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs called Not in God's Name that talks about how so much evil could be done in the name of lofty ideals. And part of it, he talks about a pathological dualism. And the pathological dualism is the world's divided between the us and the them. And this division is what brings of the good and the evil, the light and the darkness, those who are right and those who are wrong. And that dualism is at the source of collapse of society. I was born in America, and I still love America and bless America. And it's heartbreaking to see the conflicts between the Democrats and the Republicans. I'm thinking, oh my God, what are they at their throats? These issues seem to be so much less cosmically significant than the reality of connection and being together. So I feel, in essence, it's about connection. It's about relationships. I would want a party that would not be a party that would be looking for a government that would be, in Hebrew they say, Yamin Malay al Malay, 100% on the right, 100% on the left, but something that would be about connections. And connection doesn't always mean let's take the middle ground, because sometimes people in the middle could be as radical and rejecting of other people. We are the people who've seen the light to be a middle of the road, but anybody who veers a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right of us, they are totally illegitimate and mistaken and a danger to society and democracy. Something that would be able to give a place for different groups. So I will confess that the previous government, I was deeply moved that we had a prime minister who was a religious Jew, that we had a religious Muslim party, parties from the left, parties from the right. So it would be less about particular opinions, but the ability to make connections. And maybe to give another point about this, that how important relationships are. If you look at the government, part of the dysfunctional aspect of the Knesset is personal rivalries between people that have very similar political views, have led them not being able to sit together, which teaches us that relationships and connections and being able to sit together, talk together, is more important to exactly where you stand on some spectrum of more to the left, more to the right.
Which is more important for Israel, Judaism or democracy?
That's another dualism that I deeply reject. I feel some of these words have been hijacked to really misrepresent them. The concept that it's either or, and not only do I think it's not either or, I don't think it's some sacrifices and compromises of democracy and Judaism. I feel that the core values of what are we seen to be democracy are authentic, deep, core Jewish values. We could go back to the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Sorry about that gender terminology. All humanity are created equal, I think should be written today. But and the right to liberty, etc., these are basic divine Jewish values. So creating a dualism, either or, this itself sets it up for failure. True that sometimes you could have two authentic values, and how to integrate them in an ideal way will create challenges in terms of how to realize our values in complex realities. But it's in essence, it's two sacred values, divine, authentic, and Jewish values, and always how to balance and weave together.
Should Israel treat its Jewish and non-Jewish citizens the same?
In one of my institutions, the Beit Midrash for Judaism and Humanity, we are now completing a book about how a Jewish state, as a Jewish state, relate to non-Jewish minorities. It's a core value in the Bible, minority issues. So often, the Bible goes back to remembering the traumatic times that we were a persecuted minority in Egypt, and from that to have empathy with other minorities, to love them, to ensure their rights, and learn. Yeah, and this is not something that can be taken for granted. Sometimes an abused child could become an abusing parent. To say, learn from our painful experiences and learn from them, take the right messages and not the wrong messages. This is a powerful message of the Torah. And I think we were in Egypt for several hundred years. We were in exile from the land of Israel for 2,000 years. Here too, our painful journey should open us to understanding and empathy, and realizing that part of a Jewish state is the fulfillment of a vision in the Bible of how a Jewish state should relate to its minorities. And in the book, I try to take an additional step, because in the biblical categories of, in Hebrew, ger toshav, the resident, stranger resident, I feel it doesn't capture some of the potential for current realities, because in the current realities, the minorities of Israel, we have a great shared both religious and ethnic heritage. The religions of Israel, the four religions, because it's Judaism, Islam, Christianity, and the Druze religion. And ethnically, we are Jews and Arabs. We acknowledge each other's ethnic identity as returning to our patriarch Abraham. And our religions share so much of a common story. So I feel if in biblical times, minorities' rights were about tolerance, I feel there's a potential for partnership in the current realities in the state of Israel because we share so much of a common story and values. That being said, and there's still a place, and I still will stand by Israel being a Jewish state. Every state, every nation has an identity. And to erase identity, to have no identity at all, in order makes the world poorer and grayer. Israel is the one Jewish state in the world, and there are Muslim states in the world. There is a French state in the world. And every country, it could be a religious identity, it could be a linguistic identity, it could be a cultural identity. John Lennon's view of imagine no nation, no religions, I feel will lead to an impoverished world, and the enforcing of no nations, no religions would probably require a totalitarian, oppressive society, as we see from the communist regimes. Israel is a Jewish state of the Jewish people, so I am for partnership, minorities, dignity, and rights, which includes and is not undercut by a place of dignity and respect to our minorities.
Now that Israel already exists, what's the purpose of Zionism?
I have a friend that once wrote a book called The End of the Adventure is the Beginning of the Story. Meaning there are all these fairy tales, that there are these dramatic events, and then it ends, and they live happily ever after. And my friend pointed out the end of the adventure is the beginning of the story. What really matters is what is the life that the people built together, the prince and the princess. So the prince slayed the dragon. Okay, what really matters is what life did they build together. The same way with Zionism. I feel Zionism is saying that the Jewish people, who, as Rabbi Jonathan Sachs once defined us, we are not a people that have a story. We are a story that have a people. That we take our destiny into our hands, and as a religious Zionist, I believe this is in partnership with God. We take our destiny into our hands to build the story and the future of the Jewish people. Our ancestors, for 2,000 years, went through hell to preserve the Jewish identity, with so many easy exits out to save them from persecution. But they kept their identity so that one day their descendants will be able to live Jewish life in its fullest, to return, as in all our prayers, to the land of Israel, to Jerusalem. And we owe it to them that the reality of life in Israel, the state of Israel, in our capital of Jerusalem, create a reality worthy of their great sacrifice. There's a movie, Searching for Private Ryan, in which there's a scene that somebody gives his life for someone else. And his last words are, do something with it. I feel we have 2,000 years of our ancestors who, with incredible self-sacrifice, to tell us, do something with it. For me, Zionism isn't just a technicality of the Declaration of Independence for the State of Israel. It's not only overcoming the survival, it is the realization of the great vision of the Jewish people in their homeland after this incredible journey. And here, we are not at the end of the story, we're at the beginning. And in this context, I feel that my work in interfaith is part and parcel of my Zionism. So I feel that the same way part of Zionism is saying we must be active partner with God to realize this vision of this return to the land of Israel. Zionism also to fulfill the potential of this vision, which is, for me, it's also healing our relationship with humanity. And for Zionism, I include our brothers and sisters throughout the world. Because in our global society, as we're seeing now the painful aspect of it, the reality of a Jewish state, the state of Israel, impacts and creates a partnership with all of our Jewish brothers and sisters throughout the world.
Is opposing Zionism inherently anti-Semitic?
Yes. The short answer is yes. Because Zionism is an acknowledgement that part of the Judaism is not just an abstract religion. Judaism is a people, and as I said earlier, it's a story with the people, and an essential part of that story, from the Bible, from the prayers we say every day, from the ceremonies at weddings and all of our life cycle, it's an essential part of that peoplehood. It's connected to a place. It's connected to a home, a homeland. So denying Zionism is denying Jewish peoplehood. It's denying the Jewish story. And yes, that is anti-Semitism. Or maybe the word anti-Semitism, I don't think it's a word that truly captures the pathological hatred and denial of the Jewish people and our story that's been taking place for thousands of years, and tragically, beyond our worst fears, has been reborn in demonic dimensions.
Should Israel be a religious state?
Israel is a Jewish state. I feel that if religious, depending on what does it mean, a religious state. If religious state means that totalitarian control of what people do or don't do, no. But if it's a state that is a realization of the core Jewish story, values, and promotes the key story and values of Judaism, as yes, I think that's religious, yes.
If you were making the case for Israel, where would you begin?
Our story, our identity. In wake of the war, I was at a conference in Jakarta, Indonesia, and one of the questions I was asked about what's my opinion about Israeli colonialism. And I feel there's one of the narratives which has been underlying a lot of the anti-Semitism, which is a denial of our legitimate story and legitimacy. The narrative of the Jewish people as the ultra-white Europeans who have been taking away, colonializing the place of the indigenous, authentic people of color of the Middle East. This is underlying what I see as the major force of anti-Semitism, much more than Islam, which my focus is, but the neo-Marxist left. The response to that is not to give up our deep religious, ethnic identity, the Jewish people, and our story to the land of Israel, which is now the state of Israel. It's from our authenticity, an authentic connection. This must be at the forefront.
Can questioning the actions of Israel's government and army, even in the context of this war, be considered a valid form of love and patriotism?
This is a broad question, and I once said about the issue of giving rebuke. When do you know if the rebuke is coming from the heart to help the other person, or is it coming from some ego or whatnot? So I say, if you feel like saying it, then perhaps don't do it because it's coming from ego. If you feel the last thing you want to do is to open up your heart about some issues, but you do it anyway because you feel such a necessity, then maybe open the possibility. But even there, it's critical to do in a way which will bring greater good to the world, light to the world, and not darkness to the world. Even in the Talmudic laws of rebuke, part of the laws is, if it's rebuke, which by the way is juxtaposed in the Bible to v'yahavta l'reacha kamocha, loving the other as yourself, is hochiach tochiach damitecha, to rebuke your people. The Talmud says, if it will be accepted, if it will help to make a positive change, yes. But if it will not, no. And unfortunately, a lot of the critiques of Israel, the format that they've been done, who it's been presented to, not only have they led to the pathology of vicious demonizing of Israel and anti-Semitism playing to the hands of our most vicious enemies, but more than that, it has made Israelis harden them and maybe close their ears when there's so much outrageous blood libels, Orwellian inversions of all truth and reality in criticizing the Jewish people, in criticizing the state of Israel, this undercuts the ability to truly give any authentic critiques. The results have often been the opposite. Just like the BDS movement, the idea of boycotting Israel, if anything, creating if the heart of the problem in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the deep disconnection that breeds fear and hatred, so let's boycott and not talk to each other and sanctify disconnection. If those people indeed had some concern for Palestinians, it is totally self-defeating.
What do you think is the most legitimate criticism leveled against Israel today?
So, first of all, I would try to reframe that question. Criticism leveled against Israel in a country in trauma with enemies trying to destroy us, criticism leveled against is, by the very energies and terminology, is the other side attacking us. And I would give an answer to a reframed question that would be what mistakes perhaps some aspects of Israel and Israeli society are making in the current conflict. I feel that there's recognizing the global aspect and the implications of the global aspect of this conflict is important to overcome it. And this is true in a number of areas. For example, something which I hope we'll speak about more later, a lot of the focus of my work is Jewish-Muslim relations, or the hope to create a Jewish-Muslim religious fraternity. And again, and for reasons which are deeply understandable, the great trauma of the Hamas talking in the name of Islam, quoting Islamic sources in their barbaric atrocities, has understandably led to a perception that there's a conflict between Islam and Judaism, which in my belief, it's a falling into the hands of the enemy, who exactly this is what they want to create a world, that the Jewish people are in conflict with Islam. Or some will see the Jews are in conflict with the world. Everybody, the trauma has left people feeling everybody hates us. We could only depend on ourselves. And I feel that opening up to what I see the reality is, yes, we will not deny there's a lot of evil in the world. There's a lot of anti-Semitism in the world, but there's also a lot of good in the world. And I feel for the criticism I have is not the fall for that pathological dualism of it's everybody against us, but to get the complexities of our multifaceted world, not to deny the evil, but to realize that we have allies, we have friends, there is good and light in the world, including certainly within Islam, and also certainly within Arabs in Israel, and to acknowledge that and help empower that. This will give, first of all, due respect to those forces that should not be lumped together with our enemies, and I think create a better reality. One example that I would like to bring, and perhaps something which I find optimistic in these dark times. In Israel, there are 2 million Israeli Arabs. They are one of the blood libels against Israel is about apartheid and the like. I think Israeli Arabs enjoy more civil rights than any citizens in any other country in the Middle East, because the freedom in Israel, I think, is unparalleled by the other countries in the Middle East. But there are fears at the beginning and fear mongers at the beginning after October 7th that predicted, which was a fear that would the 2 million Israeli Arabs on some level join in to this war waged against Israel. Would there be a repeat of the riots several years ago in the mixed cities in Israel? And that was not the case. The Israeli Arabs, of course, there are always exceptions, but by and large, the Israeli Arabs have stood together in a very complex situation with the Jewish citizens In particular, I would like to mention Mansour Abbas, the head of the Ram party. Fascinating fact, this is the four Arab parties in Israel. This is the religious Islamic party. He has been outspoken against the atrocities. And tragically, certainly in the south, the 300,000 Israeli Bedouins of the south have been partners also in the suffering among the captives, among the murdered, among soldiers fallen, which has been the case also in the north, and certainly among Israel's small Druze Arab population. I went to give consolations at a Muslim soldier from Rat who was killed in combat, fighting the Hamas, leaving his young wife and a beautiful little daughter. So this is what we realize: getting not the same pathological dualism that has led to demonizing the Jewish people in Israel. Let us not be part of that and realize, no, Islam is not in a war against us. The Arabs are not in a war against us. The world is not against us. But there's real evil, and we must build partnerships to overcome it.
Do you think the state of Israel is part of the final redemption?
I believe that not only for the Jewish people, but in the story of humanity as a whole, the return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel, the return of the Jewish people to Jerusalem is one of the most amazing, greatest chapter of this book. Something that goes beyond ability to explain as some sort of a historical coincidence. At most, if coincidence is using the definition of Albert Einstein, coincidence, the way of God to remain anonymous. And this is a story for humanity, because most of humanity, their story is based on what happened here. It's not just the Jewish people, it's Islam, it's Christianity, and all of society. There's no one in the world that hasn't been influenced by these Abrahamic religions. And this great vision of the Jewish people returning to where it all began, and to realize that there's something enormous taking place for the world, I feel one has to be blind not to see that. And therefore, I often say when people talk about the relationship of the world to Israel, I say it's not hate, it's not love, it's obsession. There is an obsession about what happens in our tiny country. The world is so big, our nation is so small, but this global obsession has to be understood. And let me mention, I once visited an Arab school in Kfar Rama in the north of Israel, and I asked the children, Arab elementary school children, and I asked them, why do you think that even when little things happen in our country, the whole world's talking about them? So these sweet young Arab children said, because they know it all started here. And there's a feeling something very big started here, and some intuitive feeling that here and what happens here is still important for this story of humanity. And that's why I think what happens here, issues about Israel living with its neighbors in peace, its minorities, the status of religion, and the place of the divine within life, these have repercussions beyond what happens in our tiny country, but impact on the world as a whole.
Is Messianism helpful or harmful to Israel?
As many questions, the question is, what is meant by Messianism? Will Messianism be a future for me and not for anybody else or anybody who's a little bit different than me? This could lead to the greatest of evils. Part of the pathology of the Hamas is they believe we're part of a messianic story. And perhaps I'll give you one of the Islamic backgrounds for the Hamas attack. The 17th surah of the Quran is a surah that begins talking about the night journey of Muhammad to Al-Aqsa, the faraway mosque, which is in the Blessed Land. And in the Quran, the Blessed Land is always used exclusively for the land of Israel. It then tells the story about the first and second temple, Beit Midrash. That's why one of the names of this 17th surah is Beni Israel, children of Israel. Close to the end of this surah, it tells about the Jews left Egypt and came to the blessed land. And then in verse 104, for those who have a Quran, it talks about, and in the promise of the hereafter, the Jews will return to the land. And on the surface, certainly, this is seems to be some sort of a Zionist prediction, similar to the prophetic works in the Tanakh. The pathology of the Hamas says, yes, clearly the Jews are evil. The Jewish people have been rejected by God. Judaism is obsolete. So if the promise of the hereafter is the Jews will be brought back to here, this is because then they'll all be in one place, and therefore we could give them their last judgment, which will be annihilation. The Hamas would have a yearly conference called, you could Google it, The Promise of the Hereafter. So there is Messianism, which is exclusivity and annihilation of the others, those are others, and striving for that type of Messianism is a path of evil and of death. But the Jewish Messianism is a vision for all of humanity. There's one verse which very much touches my heart and work, and I'll explain on a personal level why. There's in the verse in the book of Tzfanya talks about humanity calling together in the name of God and serving Him one shoulder. And for me, and also in a book which is soon to be translated into English called God Shall Be One, re-envisioning Judaism's relations with world religions, we present the vision of the future not of Judaism becoming the global religion, but showing in a book very source-based, our vision is we connecting up with humanity and their religions to find a way for fraternity and calling together in the name of God. For me, this is personal because 2 years ago, I had a very serious brain hemorrhage. And the way that the president of Israel, Yitzhak Herzog, called it, he goes, Yaakov was on his way to the other world, but we called him back by our prayers. And during that time, when I was hovering between life and death, my wife decided to turn to the Jewish world, and so many of my Jewish brothers and sisters responded with their prayers. But she decided to reach out also to the other religious communities. So using Google Translate for whether Indonesia, Middle East, Muslims, Christians, every father, bishop, imam, qadi, she sent them, we need your prayers now. And it was an overwhelming response. And I was blessed to come back. So for me, I felt in a small way, calling together in the name of God had some small fulfillment. But this is the Jewish Messianism. 3 times a day, the Jews pray. The end of our prayer is called the Aleinu, which ends with the vision that in the future, humanity serving God, and on that day, God shall be one and His name one. So this is the vision we're praying for, which is universal, which is for all of humanity with a place for all.
Do you think peace between Israelis and Palestinians will happen within your lifetime?
I think if this is a yes or no question, this could undercut the ability to move ahead, because it seems so far away that people could lose faith. Students of mine sometimes say, Rabbi Yakov, the fact that you talk to these imams, do you think that's going to bring peace? So I tell them, you don't understand. If me, a Jew, a rabbi, creates a real, authentic relationship and connection to another person, a Muslim, an imam, and there's true friendship between us, this isn't only a means to an end. This is peace. This is shalom. This is happening right now between us. It's here now. We would like to multiply this by millions. So perhaps, dear students, let go, make peace. Find the other, Palestinian, Arab, Muslim, or Christian. Create a relationship, create a connection, and that will be to create peace in your lifetime. And I think perhaps it's important to explain the difference between the word peace in English to the beautiful word shalom in Hebrew. Jewish peace is about connection. Sometimes peace programs are about us here and them there, big walls, big disconnections. Peace is about connection. If I could share you a mystical teaching from the Zohar, the word shalom begins with the letter shin, which in Hebrew represents eish, fire. It ends with the letter mem, which in Hebrew represents mayim, water. Shalom is to take elements that are different, in some ways in conflict with each other, fire and water, and bringing them together. Or as I say, Jerusalem, the word Yerushalayim has in it the word shalom, and many of the prayers and the psalms of Jerusalem talk about shalom. And I think there are three approaches to Jerusalem. One, it's about, and the three C's. Is it control? Is it concede? Or is it connection? For some, it's all about power. Who has the power? For some say, concede. Well, it's causing us a headache. Maybe if we give it to the other, we'll solve the problem. But I believe Jerusalem, it's about the sea of connection. In fact, again, if we go back to Messianism, Messianism sees the temple as a house of prayer for all people. The alibi for the Hamas, for their murderous attack against Israel, was Al-Aqsa in danger. And I feel both in Islamic and Jewish sources, this is a blasphemous, sacrilegious attack on that holy place, because certainly from a Jewish view, the Temple Mount is a place of connection, whereas I said before in Isaiah, a house of prayer for all people. So many prophecies talk about the future of humanity coming to Jerusalem. And Islamic sources also, in the Hadith, the account of Muhammad going up to heaven from the Temple Mount, and that's where, from Al-Aqsa, where in Islamic tradition received the pillar of prayer. On the way, he meets Moses, and they have a discussion between them. They refer to each other as brother, and first Muhammad goes up, is told pray 50 times a day, and then Moses says, it's too much, negotiate with God, and they keep going back and forth till Moses helps Muhammad get it down to 5. But you see the respect in Islamic tradition for Moses, who Islam sees certainly as Jews as the primary Jewish prophet. And so what better place for Jews and Muslims and Christians who sharing our one God to express our brotherhood and our sisterhood, to come together to pray to God. So this using Yerushalayim, Har Bayit Al-Aqsa, for evil and violence as Hamas does, this is great sacrilege. But so in peace, I feel we must embrace every step along the way, and by doing that, we'll have the motivation and faith to take that next step to make it broader and deeper in building the connections and relationships between all who live here. And maybe one last point here about the power and how I feel that this is what so much of humanity is looking for. One day in the yeshiva that I teach at, I'm called to the office and I said, and told, you have to see this. I'm wondering why they're calling me out of my study hall, and they're showing me Google has this 1-minute clip called The Year in Review of the great pictures of the year. And I'm thinking, why are they showing me this to me? When we got to second 40, I realized the year in search, Google picks a picture for all the great questions that people search for answers during the year. And in searching to make sense, I saw a picture of myself hugging my dear soul brother and friend, Sheikh Ibrahim, from the Mount of Olives, hugging each other in an event called the Jerusalem Hug, in which Jews, Muslims, and Christians, Israelis and Palestinians come together to hug the walls of the city of Jerusalem, old city of Jerusalem, to say, we want Jerusalem to bring us together and not separate us.
Are political and religious divides a major problem in Israeli society?
Unfortunately, in the current realities, the answer is yes. And this perhaps is one of the greatest challenges for Israeli society, to overcome these divisions between left and right, religious and secular. And for me, often I'm asked, why is it that I deal so much with issues of interfaith, with Judaism and humanity, that there's so many internal problems within Jewish society? And one of my answers is that if we look deep down, so much of the tensions between the left and the right, the religious and the secular, go back to the broad issue of what is the relationship between Judaism and humanity. The perception that the right is exclusivism as opposed to the left, which is universal, which also that religious people have no interest or connection to broader global culture and events. This is part of what creates that great divide. So I feel that by the Jewish people, in the name of religion, rethinking its relationship to these issues, this could make breakthroughs in places that are stuck. To see that a Jew living on what's referred to as the West Bank could be somebody who deeply cares about the future of his Palestinian neighbors while being deeply connected to his home and his land. To feel that his religiosity allows him to be in connection with the other, and not this in self. With many different secular friends I have, people which they called on the left, how moving it could be for them to rethink what they think about the borders, boundaries, and conflicts in Israeli society.
Where do you identify on Israel's political and religious spectrum? And do you have friends on the quote-unquote other side?
It's hard to answer identify, because too much, part of the problem, you're this or that. And if you're this, if you're right-wing, this means you've already ascribed to a dozen beliefs that are attributed to you, and the same if you're left-wing. So that, certainly politically, I would find it difficult to respond, to put myself into a box. I feel part of the hope of Israeli society is not if you're A or B, to say, yes, I'm right-wing, but not only despite that, but because of that, I believe in some things that would seem to be the opposite, and the same for left. What I will say in terms of, I would say I identify with as a religious Zionist. And in the definition that I give for religious Zionism, certainly as a religious Jew who's committed to the will of God and living based on the Torah and the Halacha. And the Zionist part, as I tried to define earlier, Zionism is saying we need to be active partners in the unfolding of the story of the Jewish people, which I would say perhaps differentiates ourselves from our ultra-Orthodox brothers and sisters that are also, we share with them our Jewish religiosity, but the feeling of the active role we must play in building the state and the army. So in terms of the perhaps culture, religious Zionism, I am comfortable, but using the word political definition, things are too polarized to give a multiple choice A, B, C, or D to that question.
And do you have friends on the other side?
Yes, I am blessed to have friends, and I feel that part of the essence is if we define ourselves and the other based on our religious and political ideologies, then you'll be cut off from so much of the blessings of being part of a society, of a state. But if you start with you start with the person, and their ideologies and opinions are number two. That allows to create friendships and connection. In general, three sacred words that I like to say together is connection before correction. First, have that connection. Or as the Sufi mystic Rumi said, beyond ideas of right thinking, beyond ideas of wrong thinking, there is a field. There we will meet. There's no human that lacks a field that we could meet. So first have that connection. Afterwards, we could talk about correction. We could agree. We could disagree. We could be blessed by our differences.
And to close us off, do you have more hope or fear for Israel and the Jewish people?
Hope. If you go back, study the entirety of the Jewish people, from beginning to end, we see that we are no stranger to traumatic, difficult periods. And we are no stranger to even conflicts within internal Jewish society. We haven't invented any new problems that haven't been haunting us for millennium. But with that, the potentials and the possibilities that we have within the state of Israel, within the return to Jerusalem, give us a potential to overcome the problems that were always there. So it's those who have forgotten the past could feel overwhelmed with the problems of the present. But with the broad perspective, we could see the big picture and not be overwhelmed. And in terms of hope, let me share with you a major project that myself and my institution, the Or Torah Interfaith Center, is working on. In the 20th century, there was a tremendous transformation of Jewish-Christian relations. In a process referred to as Nostra Aetate, the Catholic Church overcame 2,000 years of institutionalized anti-Semitism, negativity about Jews, Judaism and the Jewish people, beginning a process of dignity, fraternity, and respect, to now feeling that a language when many Christians speak about Jews as our older brother. I believe that the next step in the 21st century, we need a Jewish-Muslim religious fraternity, not in any way to undercut the strides of Jewish-Christian relations, but to emulate that in a process ahead. And the potential here is great because certainly in the Middle East, Jews and Muslims, when it's Jews and Arabs, we see ourselves not only sharing a religious patrimony, but also an ethnic patrimony. Jews, descendants of Isaac, and the Arabs of Ishmael. And to reframe our story as there were family, as I said earlier about Israeli society, families bicker like only families could bicker. As this book of Genesis tells us about Joseph and his brothers, Isaac and Ishmael, Jacob and Esav. So too, there's tensions in the family, but families must be wise, overcome those conflicts, and create a family devotion and love for one another. And this potential is there. We are working a lot on the theological basis for it, to see how there's a place for different religions and a great story that could be built, including our identities and religions. And I feel a sign of great hope is the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords, which as opposed to Oslo, Camp David, other peace accords between Israel and its Arab neighbors, the name given to the recent peace agreements come from our common heritage, Abraham, and symbolizes that Abraham, our religions, our religious beliefs and figures and identities could bring us together and no longer set us against each other. I remember I studied at Yeshivat Har Etzion, and there were some difficult periods that some of the students were very distraught. But Rav Amital, the Rosh Yeshiva, who survived the Holocaust, who fought in the War of Independence, he was feeling how, I would say, even almost painful for him to feel the lack of proportionality in realizing the great times that we're living in with this incredible potential, and this we must open our eyes to. We are in the Torah. They talk about the generation that left Egypt, and sometimes they're worried about so many issues that for us it's shocking when we think they're living this incredibly historic, cosmic time, and they're worrying about all this and these minor issues. And I've seen people say, well, let's think about ourselves, because perhaps we are now in the most significant time period for the Jewish people since that beginning. And to broaden our perspective, yes, there are the problems, but there's a potential for hope that Bezat Hashem, please God, we will fulfill.
If you listened to our first interview with Benny Morris, then I'm sure you saw very stark differences between Rav Nagen and Benny Morris. And that's very much the idea of what 18 Questions, 40 Israeli Thinkers is going to be like. All weeks are going to be different, all perspectives are going to be different. One week we'll have a religious thinker, the next week a journalist, next week a political thinker, the following week it'll be a historian. We want to introduce, as I said in the intro, fresh perspectives, challenging ideas for everyone who's listening. And so if you have questions you want us to be asking or guests who you want us to be interviewing, please shoot us an email at info@1840.org. That's info at 1840.org. And please be sure to follow us and share this episode with others so that we can reach new listeners. And if you're looking for any other content, all things Jewish ideas, visit us on 1840.org. That's 18forty.org, where we have podcasts, essays, recommended readings, newsletters, programs, and so much more. Thank you for listening.